I'm here with Jo Innes, who's a third-year law student and the Vice President of Welfare for County College. So Jo, why do you want to run for Wellbeing Officer to start with?
Well, I mean, during my time at uni, obviously I'm a third-year student now. During my time at uni, I've been involved in quite a lot of different stuff throughout the uni. So I played American football, I've been on their exec, and now I've also been on the county JCR exec. And there's been a number of issues I've noticed that I think could do with improvement, but particularly to do with well-being, that could massively help the student body.
You've talked about wanting to promote better working between like the colleges and LUSU and the Liberation Campaign forums as well. Could you explain a bit more about exactly what you'd want to do there?
So in terms of since September this year, I've been on the county JCR exec in different welfare roles. So I was initially Men's Plus Welfare, and then in December was elected to be Vice President Welfare. And one thing I've noticed is that as JCRs we tend to be ignored, and I think it's very much the same for the forums and the LCOs as well, where like campaigns like She Should Run are very much done by the Students' Union, with the Students' Union taking a lead and not really including us or involving us in any way. And then a lot of our ideas, if they're good ideas, will just get taken by the Students' Union. And then it feels like we don't have a proper working relationship with them, to the point where if there is an issue we spot to do with a university course as part of the Lancaster Award or something, we have to make a very official statement, which we then send them saying there is a serious issue here that needs to be amended. That is then sort of hushed away and not really talked about beyond like the people who know about it. And I feel that by having better collaboration, by having just more regular meetings and more regular face-to-face like interface between us would just help improve that relationship and mean that there is more involvement from the wider student body in the student union decisions.
You've talked about She Should Run, and you've mentioned in your manifesto as well wanting to continue programmes like that. Are you pleased with the progress that they've made so far, and how much more do you think can be accomplished?
I think it's important that we do as much as possible to highlight successful people from whatever walk of life, but particularly for people who are part of a minority group. So obviously part of people who consider themselves to be Women's Plus, or who are transgender, or who are part of a BAME or part of BAME, a black and minority ethnicity. I think it's really important we do as much as possible to highlight them and what they're doing, because I feel from my own experience, obviously when a lot of the society execs, within a lot of execs in general, they maybe are a bit underrepresented, and we are in a majority white area up in the north in Lancaster. So doing as much as possible to highlight people from different walks of life and who have had different experiences and like how they become successful is really important.
Are there entirely new policies as well which you'd want the SU to implement to promote inclusivity and diversity?
Well, I mean, I'm not the most, I wouldn't say I'm the most like up to date on that sort of, like I don't have any policy ideas myself, but it'd be something I would look to work on with the LCOs and with the forums to really talk to them about what they think we should be doing to help, people who don't feel they've been properly represented in university life, and really help them do whatever they want to do.
Well, speaking of the LCOs, nominations for a couple of those roles had to be extended because no candidates at all applied. Do you think that there's a problem with a lack of participation in the Liberation and Campaign forums, and what can the SU do to address this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult problem because I myself identify as being a part of one of those forums, but I've never been to a meeting. I've never really done anything to do with them because I've just never really been aware of it. And when I have been aware of it, I felt that I've never really needed to go to a meeting and talk about the issues I face, as I feel like I've been fairly welcomed into university. But obviously, it's not ideal that a number of positions have been left unfilled and had to be reopened. So I think there definitely needs to be a discussion within the Students' Union of how best to ensure people want to actually represent, the people with these issues. So, become LCOs, want to get involved, and how best we can make sure everyone is.
And continuing to support students through the cost of living crisis as well has been a point in your manifesto. Are you satisfied with the support which LUSU is providing for students at the moment? Or are you just looking to maintain what exists, or would you be looking to go beyond the mechanisms in place already?
I think it's a mix. I feel that you know, a lot of work, particularly I think Josh recently with the pantry and obviously getting that expanded, and now obviously in Bowland House, Bowland in University House is a massive improvement. But I do still feel there are areas where there needs to be improvement. You know, in terms of stuff, it doesn't look likely that there'll be a general election until next year. Students
should be late in this year, around October, November, most likely, I think.
It should be, but you know, Rishi Sunak, I think it's fairly clear, not to talk a lot about general politics outside of university, but it doesn't look like he'll call an election before he has to.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, no matter what happens, even if he called one tomorrow, I don't think there'll be enough time for student loans to be massively updated for us to receive more money. And considering that we still do have a recession, we have continuing issues like students nowadays. I can't pay for my rent out. You know, my rent is more expensive than more money than I receive from the government. And you know, there are a number of students who work, you know, not one but two part-time jobs just to support themselves through uni. And next year, if inflation continues, that's going to become more of a problem. So it's something where the Students' Union next year is going to have to do far more to support students than even this year. So we do need to look to expand hardship funds and expand the pantry more, and I'd really be looking to campaign alongside the President to do everything we can to help support students.
Yeah, and of course, a couple of weeks ago, Keris appeared on Question Time, the current president, to talk about the issues which students at Lancaster are facing with the cost of living crisis. And as you've pointed out, a massive expense is rent, which seems to be getting higher and higher every year. And more students are finding that their entire maintenance loan won't even cover the cost of rent. Is there anything which you think the Students' Union can do to help with housing specifically? Do you think they could be pressuring the university into putting rent freezes on its accommodation, things like that?
I mean, I know Keris earlier this year, I think it was in January, announced that she'd been able to get a large proportion of low rent accommodation on campus, had that frozen for the next year. But I think, you know, like with, you know, just general cost of living stuff, it is going to be more of a problem next year, because as the price of everything else goes up, it's going to be harder to keep other prices low on accommodation. So it's something which is going to need improvement. And, you know, I think it's not just going to be an issue on campus, an issue in town as well, because any accommodation now is expensive. And I think it's going to be really difficult to try and keep the prices low, but it's something we absolutely have to campaign against the university to do.
And part of the problem as well, potentially, is the fact that the cost of living crisis is making everything less affordable, and that means that LUSU has got less cash available than maybe it would like to spend supporting students through hardship, through paying for goods in the pantry on campus. How do you think the Students' Union can continue to afford the programmes it's got in place to support students?
I mean, are you not privy to any of the financial doings of LUSU? I mean, I don't know how much money they got in their bank account, how much money they got in their savings. But, you know, the Students' Union, we really have to take a hard line on what we can do to ensure that students can continue to survive. Because it's not a case of like students trying to live, it's literally trying to survive at a minute. You know, so many students are on a breadline, and the cost of living crisis is already affecting disproportionately people on low income. And students, as a class, we get £4,500 from the government to live off for a year. And that is nowhere near enough in a modern climate. And, you know, we as a Students' Union need to campaign, you know, to get as much funding as possible from the university for it, because the university last year made a large profit, and it should only be fair that is shared with the students who can't afford to live.
Is there anything else which you'd like to mention before the end of the interview?
I mean, yeah, so in terms of stuff, obviously we've touched mainly on cost of living crisis and then increasing collaboration. One of my other manifesto policies would be to have mental health training within society and JCR execs. I think this is really important because having been on both, we did receive some very limited training on sort of what to identify and, you know, where to direct people to. However, you know, this was training which was initially written in 2019 and has not really been updated since. And I think, but now there are far more pressing issues for students than there were then. I think the cost of living crisis, I mean, not to go back to the same thing, but it's such a massive issue for students. but it does affect all of us. And more work on how to improve that and how to help students through that would be really important.
Mm-hmm.
But also just generally, you know, it'd give us a more proactive resource to deal with students' mental health problems. Because currently the advice service, which is run by LUSU, is a very reactive service and is the main one that the union uses. But by having people who are trained in just how to signpost people to the advice service would help make it more proactive, as they'd be better able to identify people who are having problems.
In terms of the types of mental health training which you'd like to implement for society execs, would that be bringing mental health professionals in to train people in person, or would that be expanding the online training which currently exists?
I think it would be a bit of both. I think you definitely want to increase and really just redevelop the training we already have. You know, the training we have currently was largely made in 2019, as already said. So by renewing that and really bringing it up to date, that would massively help. But also, you know, it would definitely wouldn't help bringing an organisation in who has experience in training people for, you know, doing these sorts of roles, and letting them give us training so that then we know actually what the best things to do, what they've spotted from national issues, not just from within Lancaster Uni.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
I'm here with Ella, who's a third-year Geography and Economics student from Lonsdale College. So firstly, Ella, why do you want to run for Wellbeing Officer?
So basically, as you said, I'm in my third year, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time at Lancaster so far, and that's something I'd like to continue. During this time, I've had my own problems. I've seen my friends and other people have different issues, all of which fall under relatively similar categories, and these are issues that I'd like to help people through. And I've done that as part of a JCR before, and I just like helping people is really the fundamental of it. But yeah, it's something I'd love to do for next year.
You've talked in your manifesto about wanting to promote student safety. Can you talk a bit more about what you've got in mind there?
Yeah, of course. Basically, that's kind of an umbrella term, I suppose, for it. That a lot falls under it. As you'll see in my manifesto as well. Basically, I've got the late night Do It Right. That's already a campaign that exists that I want to continue. Where when exec members in different societies work and have time in town, it's not necessarily always done in the safest manners, and there's not always the resources there that they need. So basically that would be about educating different exec members as well as the venue managers in town, to make it more safe.
How do you think you could encourage events managers and venue managers at places which aren't owned by the university or the SU to take part in these sorts of things?
One thing I would do if I got elected is basically sit down with these managers, speak to them as a collective and just say, these are the priorities of the Students' Union, is to obviously protect our students, and essentially educate them on the resources available to them, as well as what isn't going to work with us. So if they encounter issues, they should come to us without, there shouldn't be issues in the first place, obviously, but things are bound to happen. So.
Okay. And you've talked as well in your manifesto about you want to help promote renters' rights and make sure that students are aware of their rights as tenants. How exactly would you plan on going about this?
So, from my friends and lots of other people I've met, everyone that's lived in town, whether it's it's less of an issue for university managed accommodation, but they don't know the extent of their renting rights. So they can live in multi-flats and such, and they just don't know what to do about it. And basically, to fix that, I would build on the Rent Smart campaign again that already exists, to ensure that before they sign contracts, they know what's in the contract, they know what it means, and how to deal with the issues. And then once they are moved in, that they can come to the Students' Union for advice and to navigate different issues they're having within their accommodations.
A big part of the job as Wellbeing Officer is working with the LCOs, the Liberation Campaign Officers. How exactly would you plan on working with them, and what sort of initiatives would you be looking to implement with them?
I think there's some maybe controversy about this. Some people, I mean, obviously they're titled deliberation and campaigns officers, but I think that depends on individuals. So for my time, for instance, on my JCR, I held more event-focused things. And if someone comes into the LCO position and is better at hosting events and like curating a community, that's something I'd support them with. Alternatively, if they are better at campaigns, then I'll support them within that. So I would speak to them individually and see what they're better at and see what the team wants to do. And then from there, focus on what they help them navigate different things.
And one problem which we've had in recent years is that people don't try to run to become LCOs. In this year's elections, nominations have been extended for several LCO positions because there have been no candidates at all. There was a similar problem last year as well. What do you think is stopping people from running for these positions?
I would imagine the workload. I think the JCRs face similar issues where it's not necessarily very well known that what and how much they do, or alternatively it is well known how much they do, and thus they're like they're aware of the position and then they are sort of scared by it by the amount of workload. And especially because I think first years tend to have more time, whereas when you progress to second and third year especially, you are meant to switch your focus to your degree. So in second year is when you can join exec teams and that works well, but then when it gets to third year, you often want to hone down on what you're studying. So, but that's the same time as when you imagine applying for an LCO position. So you might have done an exec team in second year and then want to progress in third year and then decide it's too difficult.
And part of the problem as well, I'd imagine, is that the workload can be similar to a part-time job, which a student might take, but the difference is that all the part-time jobs paid, the LCO positions are completely voluntary. Now, of course, the SU struggles with funding, they've got a certain amount of cash to go around, but would you support a part-time salary for LCOs? Do you think that's a practical option?
I think that's definitely something that should be discussed. I think, again, it's got its advantages and disadvantages. Part of which being, obviously, if they apply for the role and they're doing a good job, they should benefit from that and get an income. But it works the other way as well, that if there's someone in that role, for example, they might have the role and earn it, but then get into the role and be paid and not do anything. Again, you could make the argument that they could then be fired and removed from the position and then be filled with someone else. So,
a problem which students and which universities across the UK are facing is a bit of a mental health crisis, especially since the pandemic. And as Wellbeing Officer, you'd be pretty much in charge of making sure that students' mental health is well represented. It doesn't go overlooked by the university and by the SU. What would you want to do specifically to help address this at Lancaster?
I think one of the biggest issues Lancaster faces within that is navigating the systems we have. So even me, having worked within an exec team as a welfare officer, it's overwhelming. I know that it's overwhelming, whether it's your CAT team, it's your JCR team, it's someone from the society you're going to message, or the actual SU like advice service. There's too many, there's not too many, but there's different access points and you often don't know which one to choose. So making it clear which one you're supposed to go through, or making it more well known that you can speak to any of them about any issues, and then you'll be further navigated within the system.
A particular focus on signposting then?
Yes, exactly,
okay.
Signposting.
And another issue of welfare which you get at universities is things such as drug use and all sorts of sexual activity. And I know that there are particular STIs where the rates in the northwest are quite high. What would your approach be to sort of combating this? Would it be focused more on education, or especially in the case of drugs, would you want to focus more on abstinence?
I think education is always a good way to go, especially at this age. At least within my education, I've grown up knowing the effects of, for instance, drugs, or even STIs and STDs. I think education of the help that is available, whether that's on campus or off campus with external parties like the NHS and such, Or, sorry, what was the question?
Would you want to focus more on education or more on a policy of discouraging drug use?
Yeah, I'd say more on education. And so education around the services available to help within these issues that people face within those. Sort of related to that would be, in my manifesto I've spoken about the funding bids and expanding those to include health and sanitary products. They already advertise the free sexual health services that are available. I think it's every Wednesday, available on campus and stuff. But yeah.
Okay. And a big push which we've had in the current year with Josh, who's the current Vice President Welfare, has been to make Sugar House one of the safest places in the country to have a night out. And indeed, for quite a while now, I believe it's been up there as one of the safest nightclubs in the country. What would you want to do to help keep Sugar House a safe place to have a night out?
Yeah. I think Josh has done a good job within his role to do everything he has done. I think one of the biggest, most positively talked about that he's done is probably continuing and promoting the free sugar bus. I think it's a massive help for students, especially within the cost of living crisis. And I've heard firsthand from people that it just makes the night safer because they don't rely on taxis and stuff to get back to campus or back to Barham.
And another focus of the role of wellbeing officers is advocating for particular groups of students who might feel like they lack a voice or might feel that they suffer forms of discrimination. Are there any particular causes which you'd want to focus on, and in what ways would you be wanting to advocate for the rights of minority students on campus?
I think for me in particular, especially as an overseas student, that's something I'd want to focus on is international students, but not just international, like officially international students, but foreign students. So I'm classed as a local student or whatever, because my parents are English and I am an English person sort of thing. But that doesn't mean I don't deal with the same issues that international students face. One of these, for instance, could be after first year or after whenever you're here and you've lived in university accommodation and you have a contract starting, say your contract ends in July and you start the next one in August, like start of July finishes, sorry, I've got this all muddled up. Point being, you would lack a storage facility, and it's difficult as an international student to understand different contracts about that as well, never mind sourcing the actual appropriate storage in the first place.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention before the end of the interview?
Just another thing on that point would be postgraduate students, because I feel like they're often overlooked. So creating a bigger community and more events within that. I know that differs for departments and things, but even so, I think they're, especially as such a big proportion of the student society, is important.
Thank you very much, Ella.
Thank you.